there is a heavy, sodden saturation that swells deep inside your abdomen when you carry the unvoiced anxieties of everyone around you into the dark. You are lying awake under the coarse weight of your matte cotton coverlet, yet the room does not feel truly empty or clean. Your skin feels crowded by the invisible residue of moods that do not belong to your story, leaving your mind feeling thick and waterlogged. A quiet draft moves against the raw cedar framing of your window. The smell of cooling rain on dry bark rises from the sill, yet your internal landscape remains deeply congested. You have become an accidental sponge for the unexpressed grief of your world. Tonight, your boundaries feel thoroughly dissolved under the weight of this borrowed dampness. You can feel the heavy echo of their complaints vibrating in your shoulder blades, making your muscles feel stiff and unyielding against the bed. It is an incredibly lonely desolation to feel, as if your own mind has been turned into a crowded boarding house. This is an open room where the chaotic emotions of others can enter and unpack their luggage without your permission. Your nervous system is reacting as if every external conflict is a fire you must personally extinguish, demanding that you stay awake to analyze their expressions. You lie there, tracking the phantom shifts in their behavior, terrified that your relationships will collapse into ruin if you let down your guard. But your sensitive spirit is not defective because it has soaked up the heavy downpour of your environment. You are not structurally broken because you cannot easily shake off the tension of those you love. Your profound exhaustion is the natural response of a highly receptive fiber that has been exposed to a long, humid season of external distress. We are not going to spend these hours trying to forcefully wring out your heart. We are not going to demand that you dry out your entire emotional landscape before you are permitted to sleep. The sodden moisture you have gathered from the complaints of others can simply be left to rest upon the broad, open mesh of this evening. Your consciousness can drop its frantic defense and settle into the quiet, unmoving support of the wood timber below. There is a strange, agonizing paradox that lives at the very center of this empathetic saturation. We tell ourselves that to truly care for people, we must open our vessels completely and drink in their bitter water until our own floors are flooded. We believe that if we do not absorb their anger or match their anxiety, we are being cold and uncaring human beings. But the deepest insights of the Zen tradition reveal that true compassion is never a porous sponge that destroys its own fiber to clean a dirty table. True clarity relies on a quality of spacious equanimity. This is a realization that we can hold space for the sorrow of the world without allowing its sticky residue to rewrite our essential substance. The emotional weather you have gathered today is not your personal identity, but a passing mountain mist that requires a wide frame to pass through. When you attempt to store the grief of others in your own tissues, you are preventing the natural elements from completing their own cycle. Dear friend, right now, if you have felt this suffocating density of borrowed grief tightening around your chest today, I want you to know that your solitary guard shift is over. Maybe you have felt this too, the utter exhaustion of sitting in a room and knowing exactly what everyone is hiding behind their polite smiles. It is a grueling, impossible labor to turn your own nervous system into a filtration plant for the unhealed wounds of your entire circle. Your spirit is begging for permission to stop taking ownership of their storms. Let the crisp, drying air of this evening ground your heavy limbs, noticing how the unpainted wood of your bed frame does not absorb the humidity. Let your stomach soften, let your palms open, and release the invisible responsibility you have been carrying for the emotional survival of others. The difficult conversations have been suspended, and the silent judgments of others have been left at the threshold. The urgent need to repair their happiness has grown completely quiet for the night. You are allowed to return to your own borders, leaving the heavy baggage of their unvoiced demands out on the gravel path. The world often tells us that our sensitivity is a vulnerability that must be protected by building massive stone walls. We are taught to believe that we must either absorb everything until we drown, or harden our hearts until we can no longer feel the texture of life. But the ancient tea masters of the high mountain slopes understand a completely different way of meeting the heavy dampness of the world. They do not build stone vaults to hide the fresh green leaves from the mountain mist, and they do not try to fight the humidity with heavy fires. Instead, they place the harvest upon wide frames of woven bamboo, allowing the alpine wind to pass completely through the fibers until the bitter moisture evaporates. The leaf does not become hard like iron, and it does not lose its essential fragrance in the draft. It simply becomes cured, stable, and completely dry, transforming the external dampness into a sweet preservation. Tonight, your tired mind is being invited to step onto that high, slatted terrace, far above the waterlogged valleys of your daily obligations. You can think of this bed as your own personal bamboo tray, a wide frame that asks nothing from you, other than to lie flat and let the air move. You do not have to fix a single relationship before your eyes are allowed to close. You do not have to resolve the unvoiced tensions of your household to deserve your place in the quiet. The people you love must carry their own elemental weathering through the night, and your anxiety has no power to dry their paths for them. Let your weight sink deep into the unyielding timber of the floorboards, noticing how the dark room encloses your form without demanding an explanation. The smoke has cleared from the low rafters, and the modern world has retreated beyond the ridge. The heavy dampness you have carried for others is finally being given permission to wither away into the stillness. We do not need to discover a state of perfect clarity before your eyes are allowed to close. We do not need to resolve the riddle of your relational boundaries before you can find a deep, restorative sanctuary. The true healing transformation of your spirit does not happen by forcefully drying every wet leaf in your mind. Instead, we allow your saturated consciousness to rest openly on the wide bamboo trays of this dark room. Think of your mind tonight as a harvest of green, wild tea leaves that have been spread thin across a slatted cedar loft. This loft sits high above the damp forest floor, where the valley mist cannot pool. You do not have to force the moisture to leave your fibers through a battle of intellect, and you do not have to justify your fatigue to the mountain. For these next few hours, your only work is to allow the heavy, borrowed dampness to wither away naturally into the passing alpine draft. Let your weight find its final, unbothered placement within the dry cedar chest, while the world's weather passes cleanly through the gaps. The path that ascends into the high cedar forest of Mount Uji is covered in a thick layer of wet moss, a damp stone stairway that rises far above the shouting merchants and crowded clinics of the valley floor. It was along this steep trail that a young novice nun named Jiko climbed one evening, her shoulders bent low under the invisible, agonizing weight of a profound internal saturation. For 2 years, she had been assigned to the village healing house at the foot of the ridge, a place where the sick, the angry, and the dying poured their grievances directly into her ears. Because her heart was naturally receptive, Jiko had tried to be a perfect sanctuary for their pain, drinking in their unspoken resentment and family feuds until her own mind felt like a stagnant, waterlogged marsh. She had begun to experience a constant, sickening heaviness in her stomach, a persistent, physical nausea that made her feel as though she were personally suffocating under the collective grief of the entire district. When she finally reached the open-walled smoke sheds at the mountain crest, the cold alpine wind was whistling sharply through the cedar slats, carrying the crisp, bitter aroma of roasting pine needles. Inside the shed, an old tea-curing nun named Sister Mailing was working alone by the dim light of a single tallow lamp, her papery, sun-darkened skin moving with an unhurried, rhythmic precision. Mailing did not offer a polite greeting or ask Jiko about the tears that had dried on her mud-splattered face. She simply reached into a woven basket and lifted a wide, hand-shaved implement known as the willow peel scoop. The scoop was remarkably light, its flat wood dark with the juices of 10,000 harvests, its broad edge used to turn the fragile leaves without bruising their delicate veins. Jiko sank onto a rough cedar log, her voice cracking with a deep, long-suppressed exhaustion as she confessed that her spirit had failed the monastery's high standard of infinite mercy. She wept as she explained that the heavy, toxic energy of the villagers had seeped so deeply into her skin that she could no longer find a single pocket of clean, quiet space inside her own chest. She believed she was fundamentally broken because she could not absorb their misery without feeling entirely destroyed by it, declaring that she wanted to harden her heart into an unfeeling slate tile just to survive the morning. Sister Mailing listened to her frantic words without a single nod of judgment. She quietly extended the wide willow peel scoop and dropped a massive, tightly packed clump of wet, freshly picked green tea leaves directly into Jiko's trembling lap. The bundle was shockingly heavy, a cold, sodden mass of vegetation that had been jammed tightly into the bottom of a deep collection sack where the air could not circulate. Mailing instructed the young nun to slip her fingers into the center of the green clump, telling her to feel what happens when the individual leaves are forced to hold each other's trapped moisture in the dark. Jiko did as she was told, pushing her hand into the dense core of the bundle, only to pull it back with a sharp gasp of disgust as she felt a slimy, suffocating heat building up inside the vegetation. The trapped water had begun to sour, turning the sweet, wild fragrance of the high forest into a bitter, fermenting rot that was actively destroying the fiber of the harvest from within. Sister Mailing leaned her chin against her calloused palm, her steady eyes reflecting the dim orange flicker of the charcoal brazier as she watched Jiko wipe the green slime from her fingers. The old nun explained that when green leaves are piled in a dense defensive heap to protect themselves from the elements, they do not stay fresh, they simply cook in their own trapped humidity until the entire harvest turns to grey ash. She noted that Jiko had been treating her own soul exactly like that suffocating collection sack, packing the liquid grievances of the village into her tissues because she believed that holding their dampness was an act of true holiness. Mailing shook her head, her voice dropping into a low, resonant register that matched the steady whistle of the alpine wind through the high cedar slats. Slowly, with an unhurried, deliberate grace, Mei Ling took the wide willow peel, scooped back from Jiko's lap, and slid its thin edge beneath the heavy, rotting clump of vegetation. With a single, gentle flick of her wrist, she spread the wet leaves across a massive open-mesh bamboo tray that was suspended 3 feet above the dry dirt floor of the smoked. The green fibers were instantly separated from one another, laid out in a single, spacious layer, where they were no longer forced to bear the weight of their neighbors' wetness. The old nun told Jiko to stand perfectly still before the tray, instructing her to watch how the leaf relates to the heavy mountain air when it is no longer crowded into a defensive wall. The transformation was not instantaneous, but as the minutes stretched out in the dim, quiet shed, the scene began to breathe with a spacious, profound clarity. The sharp, freezing alpine draft passed completely through the open gaps of the woven bamboo tray, moving between the separated green leaves without meeting a single barrier of resistance. Jiko watched in absolute silence as the bitter, sour moisture began to evaporate from the surface of the vegetation, carried away into the dark night sky by a wind that did not belong to the shed or the valley. The leaves did not have to harden themselves into stone to protect their internal essence, and they did not have to run away from the cold mountain mist to remain pure. They simply remained wide open to the draft, allowing the sky to rinse their fibers of the excess water until they became light, fragrant, and completely stable. A sudden, deep shudder passed through Jiko's chest, a profound wave of emotional recognition that made her hands drop listlessly to her sides. She realized that her agonizing internal nausea was not a sign that she lacked compassion, but the inevitable consequence of her own porous, clinging behavior. She had been acting like a damp collection sack, mistaking the act of hoarding other people's water for the practice of true spiritual healing. By trying to keep the villagers' grief packed tightly inside her own heart, she had prevented the natural wind of impermanence from clearing the space, turning her own mind into a sour, suffocating chamber of borrowed decay. Sister Mei Ling slid the willow peel scoop into a leather loop on her apron, her face remaining entirely unreadable in the shadows of the rafters. She did not promise Jiko that the village clinic would become a peaceful place tomorrow, and she did not tell her that the sick would stop bringing their heavy, bitter complaints to the temple gates. She merely reached out and tapped the wide, open mesh bamboo screen with her knuckle, letting the resonant, hollow click of the wood echo through the mountain clearing. The old nun murmured that the wind has no power to rot a fiber, that refuses to trap the rain, leaving Jiko alone with the dry, rustling music of the leaves as the midnight dark closed around the mountain. Shed this slow unraveling of Jiko's internal distress illuminates the hidden, exhausting mechanics of our own daily emotional saturation. When you step back from the academic definitions of ancient psychology and look directly at your own nightly fatigue, you see that your pain is not caused by the simple presence of other people's difficulties. The true, agonizing depletion happens because your mind has formed a subconscious habit of trapping those external currents, gathering their heavy, liquid grievances and storing them away in your own muscles like a hoard of wet timber. We believe that if we do not absorb the full impact of their sadness into our own tissues, we are failing to show real devotion or kindness to those who are suffering around us. We treat our internal space as a dumping ground for every passing storm in our household, completely forgetting that a waterlogged frame has no power to offer shelter to anyone in the winter. The profound baseline of Buddhist insight does not ask you to turn your heart into a frozen block of stone, nor does it command you to become a cold, indifferent spectator who smiles while others weep. True equanimity is a much quieter, more spacious sanctuary that lives just beneath the turbulent weather of your daily interactions. It is the deep realization that you can witness the grief of your friends, your family, or your co-workers with absolute tenderness, while remaining entirely non-porous to the energetic residue they leave behind. The initial friction of encountering their anger or confusion is like the natural morning mist that brushes against the mountain foliage, an unchangeable event that brings a temporary dampness to the outer skin. The extra suffering begins when you reach out with your thoughts and grab that mist, locking it inside a dark, unventilated box because you believe it is your personal duty to hold the weight of the sky. Consider how much unnecessary weight you add to your life when you treat every external mood as an absolute verdict on your own emotional survival. When someone enters your space carrying a sharp spike of unspoken hostility, your immediate instinct is to brace your ribs to analyze their expressions under a harsh internal spotlight and to begin packing their tension directly into your throat. You spend your evening hours obsessively replaying their words or rehearsing future arguments, a frantic effort to fix their discomfort so your own system can finally feel safe again. This constant packing of the fiber does not help the person who is struggling. It only turns your own internal climate into a sour, fermenting chamber where your vital energy is eaten away by borrowed friction. The original pain was simply the presence of their difficult mood, but the crushing exhaustion you feel right now is the extra layer of dampness you accumulated by refusing to let their energy pass through your slats. True spiritual protection does not mean you must build a massive, aggressive fortress or run away from the people who need your care. Freedom emerges when you fundamentally alter the way your awareness meets the emotional climate of your environment, choosing to act as an open, wide-mesh bamboo frame rather than a heavy sponge. It is the gentle recognition that the anger of a partner, the anxiety of a parent, or the frantic stress of a workplace are merely passing currents of impermanent weather, moving across the mountain according to their own complicated causes. Their moods belong entirely to their own developmental path, and your nervous system was never designed to be the purification machine that cures their internal decay. When you stop trying to hoard their water, you create a spacious, clear perimeter where they can experience their own natural changes without your interference. As you lie here, in the quiet darkness of your room, let yourself notice how much physical effort it actually takes to maintain your internal absorption. The subtle, chronic clenching required to keep your body braced against the problems of the world. You do not need to spend your remaining evening hours managing the unvoiced expectations of your circle, and you can completely abandon the habit of treating their unhappiness as a personal failure on your part. This release is an act of profound, radical compassion toward your own physical frame, a realization that your peace of mind is far too vital to be sacrificed for the illusion of total relational control. You are choosing to value the authentic space of your current breath over the impossible task of keeping everyone around you perfectly comfortable. Your awareness right now can be thought of as that wide, high-altitude terrace on the slopes of Mount Fuji, a place where the cedar slats are open to the infinite sky and the floorboards are completely dry. The loud voices of the valley and the heavy demands of your relationships may still echo through your memories like distant crows circling the tree line, but there is no need to reach out your arms to catch them or pull them into your bed. Let them move through the empty space, observing how their sharp edges naturally soften when you refuse to give them a dense, defensive wall to crash against. You are simply the spacious frame that allows the mountain wind to clear the atmosphere, a presence that remains fundamentally light, stable, and completely unwritten by the heavy downpours of this passing world. If it feels right to you at this moment, you might allow your physical frame to rest completely flat against the unmoving baseline of your bed, letting your awareness soften around the edges of the room. There is absolutely no need to force a sudden state of profound stillness or to aggressively clear the lingering residue of your day through an act of mental discipline. Perhaps you can simply observe the current texture of your breathing, noticing the small, natural rise and fall of your abdomen without trying to reshape its internal cadence. Each intake of air can be met as a light, spacious draft that naturally cools the heated corners of your ribs, while each exhalation can be a passive dropping of your physical mass into the dark. Even a tiny shift in your perspective, a gentle recognition of the sheer weight of your bones resting upon the sheets, is entirely enough to begin softening the tight defense you have maintained since the morning. As you lie here in the quiet, you can begin to notice the individual thoughts that are still drifting through your consciousness like stray leaves caught in an eddy. If an old memory of a difficult conversation or an image of someone else's troubled face surfaces in the dark, there is no need to push it away or fight its presence with your intellect. You might find it helpful to gently name the internal pattern that is occurring right now, whispering to yourself that this is simply the familiar habit of the damp collection sack, trying to pack more water into the fiber. Naming this dynamic with a soft, non-judgmental curiosity allows you to step away from the center of the storm, transforming you from a frantic participant into a steady witness who is merely observing the movement of the landscape. You are not your tendency to absorb the grief of others. You are simply the spacious loft where the weather is being noticed. Perhaps you can bring into your mind's eye the image of that wide, open mesh bamboo tray from the mountain smoked, visualizing its clean, hand-woven structure, suspended in the cool alpine air. If you feel comfortable doing so, you can choose to place the specific worries you have gathered from your family, your friends, or your workplace directly upon this wide screen, letting them be laid out in a single, uncrowded layer. There is no need to bundle them together or to try to solve their mysteries before dawn. You can just let them rest openly upon the wooden slats, where the space is vast and unrestricted. See them as individual, green fibers that are no longer forced to ferment in a defensive clump, completely exposed to a wind that does not require your personal effort to blow. As you watch this image in the theater of your imagination, you can allow the visualization to change naturally at its own organic pace without trying to dictate the outcome. You might notice the cold mountain wind beginning to pass completely through the open gaps of the bamboo screen, moving through the separated worries without meeting a single barrier of resistance. The heavy, stagnant dampness that you absorbed from the complaints of others is gently evaporating from the fiber, turning into a harmless vapor that drifts harmlessly up through the cedar roof, slats into the infinite dark sky. The thoughts themselves may still remain on the tray as faint, dry shapes, but they are losing their sticky, toxic hold on your stomach, becoming light, aromatic, and completely stable as the sky rinses away the excess moisture. Whenever you are ready, you can return your attention to the absolute reality of the present moment, anchoring your awareness in the simple, immediate sensations of your physical body. Feel the smooth contact of your skin against the fabric of your coverlet, the subtle warmth that has begun to pool in the palms of your hands, and the quiet whistle of the air moving through your nostrils. You are a living person resting safely in a dark room, entirely separate from the chaotic, emotional narratives that your circle is spinning in the valleys below. The urgent duty to repair their happiness has been completely suspended for the night, and the borders of your own house are entirely secure against their storms. There is no promise of an immediate, miraculous healing required tonight, and you do not have to achieve a state of flawless, non-porous mastery before your eyes are permitted to close. The true, lasting transformation of your spirit happens in these tiny, unhurried choices to step back from the collection sack and let the air circulate around your wounds. Your consciousness can remain as a wide, slatted frame that asks nothing from you other than to lie still and let the evening complete its own cycle of preservation. The charcoal in the brazier has grown dark, the mountain draft is perfectly clean, and you are being granted a total, unconditional discharge from the heavy labor of holding up the sky. The high cedar rafters of the Mount Uji smokest had gathered several weeks of dark, aromatic soot when a violent summer tempest broke over the mountain terrace, turning the mountain path into a roaring cataract of grey water. As the wind howled through the open wooden slats, a desperate crowd of 7 charcoal burners from the lower valley suddenly burst through the threshold, seeking refuge from the bitter downpour. They were dripping wet, covered in a sticky layer of black coal dust, and their faces were deeply contorted by an intense, toxic fury born from a bitter dispute over a ruined woodland boundary line. They threw their heavy sacks onto the dirt floor and immediately began screaming at one another, their voices clashing like iron blades in the confined space, filling the narrow shed with an overwhelming wave of hostility and ancient family grudges. Jiko felt an immediate, suffocating knot tighten in the center of her chest as the familiar, sickening waves of their collective anger crashed over her nervous system, tempting her old habit to instantly pack their venom into her own belly. Her palms grew damp, and she felt a frantic impulse to jump between the screaming men, to frantically patch over their grievances with polite words, or to absorb their loud rage into her own bones. Just to quiet the room, she looked desperately towards Sister Mailing, expecting the old nun to command the men to leave or to offer a severe lecture on the value of monastic silence. But Mailing remained completely motionless on her low, 3-legged stool, her worn hands resting loosely on her knees, her wrinkled face completely unwritten by the screaming match occurring 2 feet from her shoulder. Instead of trying to fix the human storm or running away to a quiet cell, The old nun calmly reached out and slid a small, heavy clay bowl, known as the cypress charcoal brazier, into the absolute center of the floor, right between the feet of the arguing laborers. The brazier was filled with tightly packed white coals that burned with a completely silent, non-spitting heat, glowing with a deep crimson light beneath a thin layer of pale grey ash, with a slow, deliberate elongation of her spine. Mei Ling reached into her apron pocket, withdrew a small handful of dry pine needles, and dropped them directly onto the glowing coals. A thick, brilliant ribbon of clean, resinous smoke instantly curled up into the air, its sharp, refreshing aroma filling the wooden structure and meeting the suffocating odor of wet wool, sour sweat, and coal dust that the men had brought inside. The clean fragrance did not aggressively attack the bad smells of the room, and it did not build a wall to divide the air into pure and impure sections. It simply occupied its own space with a total, unyielding clarity of presence, floating steadily between the rafters while the storm raged outside. Jiko watched the rising smoke, and in that precise moment of sensory convergence, she stopped resisting the raw reality of the chaotic room around her. She noticed that the cypress charcoal brazier did not crack when the men shouted, and the white coals did not lose their steady heat when the black coal dust drifted into the bowl. With a sudden, quiet shift in her understanding, the young nun took one slow, deliberate breath before a single panicked thought could dictate her next movement deliberately, choosing not to treat her own anxious impulses as an absolute truth. She realized that she did not have to become a perfect, unfeeling statue to survive the chaos, nor did she need to absorb the charcoal burners' ancestral hatred to prove her devotion to their welfare. She could simply remain as a wide, open frame, allowing their loud words to pass cleanly through her awareness like the wind passing through the cedar slats. A profound, calming realization settled into the very tissue of Jiko's shoulders as she stood beside the open mesh trays. She understood that the men were not deliberately trying to contaminate her soul with their rage. They were simply wrapped in the heavy, blinding steam of their own private confusion, acting out the pain of an unhealed lineage that had nothing to do with her. The young nun stepped quietly to the back corner of the shed, lifted a heavy wooden bucket of fresh spring water, and began pouring it into a row of simple clay cups with a steady, unhurried hand. She did not offer them a single word of spiritual advice, and she did not pretend that their bitter, ugly argument had not happened. She merely walked into the center of the shouting circle and placed the cool water before their soot-stained hands, her own pulse remaining completely steady and unhurried as she moved through their heat. One by one, the charcoal burners stopped their shouting to reach for the clay vessels, their voices dropping into a low, embarrassed murmur as the rich, clean aroma of the pine needles continued to settle the atmosphere of the shed. The underlying conflict over the woodland boundary line was not magically resolved, and the men did not undergo a sudden, holy conversion before they finished their drinks. Yet the room had completely changed its internal resonance, because Jiko had stopped acting as a porous sponge for their tension, providing a spacious, non-reactive perimeter where they could experience their own gradual cooling. When the torrential rain finally softened into a light drizzle, the laborers gathered their heavy sacks and walked out onto the mountain trail, leaving the smokestack entirely empty once more. Jiko returned to her cedar stool, her breathing now perfectly synchronized with the low, silent glow of the cypress charcoal brazier. She had not achieved a state of absolute, superhuman enlightenment, and she knew that tomorrow she would still feel the initial, sharp sting of human suffering when she descended to the village clinic. But she had fundamentally altered her relationship to that pain, dropping the exhausting illusion that she was personally responsible for purifying the water of every well she passed. She sat quietly with the remaining uncertainty of the valley, her heart remaining entirely open, light and beautifully uncompromised by the soot of the world. As the mountain wind continued to sweep the floorboards clean, this profound shift in Jiko's internal orientation exposes the heavy, psychological scaffolding that keeps your own mind locked in a state of exhausting midnight surveillance. When you trace the root of your constant emotional saturation, you find that your nervous system is not actually being depleted by the mere presence of other people's chaos. The true, hidden engine of your exhaustion is the subtle, frantic belief that you must somehow control, reshape, or resolve their internal climates before you are allowed to experience your own quiet center. You spend your evening hours rehearsing future confrontations, endlessly replaying the tense expressions of your family members and desperately searching for a way to secure their approval. This chronic policing of their well-being is driven by a deep, unexamined fear of relational uncertainty, a terrifying idea that if they remain unhappy or unstable, your own world will completely fall apart. You have likely turned this painful habit of absorption into a core part of your personal identity, believing that to be an authentic, spiritually developed person, you must carry a heavy cross of borrowed suffering. You try to fix your own perceived sensitivity through a pattern of self-judgment and shame, scolding yourself for feeling so easily overwhelmed, while simultaneously opening your doors to every passing emotional vampire. This constant effort to turn your soul into an ideological shield for your entire circle creates a secondary, much more destructive layer of internal friction. The original difficulty was simply the raw fact that a loved one was experiencing a difficult mood, a transient condition that belonged entirely to their own path. The crushing distress that keeps your ribs tight tonight is the extra weight you manufactured through your refusal to let their emotional weather exist without your immediate intervention. There is a vital, liberating distinction between the natural occurrences of life and the extra suffering your intellect builds on top of them through the mechanism of resistance. The common frictions of human interaction, the unexpected coldness of a partner, or the sudden panic of a coworker are like the raw, green, wild tea leaves that grow randomly along the rough mountain slopes. They contain an inherent, bitter dampness that is simply a part of their organic nature, an unalterable reality that cannot be argued away by your personal for perfect. The profound peace of the Zen path does not emerge from a magical destruction of these difficult green leaves, nor does it require you to spend your life frantically trying to prune every wild bush in the valley. True freedom begins when you change your fundamental relationship to that bitterness, allowing the raw elements to exist in the world without packing their heavy moisture into the dark spaces of your own chest. When you attempt to force another person's emotional state to conform to your need for absolute safety, you are acting like a frantic farmer who tries to dry out an autumn cloud by waving a wooden fan at the sky. The more energy you expand, trying to push the moisture away from your fields, the more congested and exhausted your own body becomes, while the cloud continues to move according to its own heavy trajectory. The deep-rooted wisdom of equanimity asks you to drop the fan completely, to stop treating the internal storms of others as a personal emergency that you are obligated to repair before dawn. You can choose to remain as a steady, spacious structure that simply allows the humidity to surround it, trusting that your essential identity is not defined by the weather passing through your yard. This release is not an act of selfish abandonment, but a profound realization that people must navigate their own elemental seasons to find their true, stable alignment. Let yourself feel the immense transformative relief that comes when you stop trying to cure your sensitivity through the application of a permanent, rigid armor. You do not need to spend your remaining night hours analyzing why a particular individual chose to project their inner darkness onto your shoulders during the afternoon. Their behavior is merely a reflection of their own internal soot, a pattern of historical bruising that you have no power to erase or heal through another hour of agonizing overthinking. By refusing to give their projection a dense, reactive wall to crash against, you are allowing their energy to pass cleanly through your perimeter, leaving your inner sanctuary completely light and untouched. You can lay down the invisible clipboard of your relational tracking, letting the unresolved questions of your family dynamics dissolve into the vast, unmoving dark of this room. Your awareness right now can be thought of as that steady, clay, cypress charcoal brazier sitting quietly in the center of the wooden smokestack, holding its own silent heat without a single crack. The black coal dust of other people's grievances may still drift through the air around you, but it has no power to alter the deep, crimson core of your own essential presence. You are not a porous sponge that must dissolve into every puddle of mud it encounters. You are the stable, warmth-giving bowl that remains entirely whole while the human storm completes its natural cycle. Let your breathing become slower and more spacious, noticing how the quiet dark encloses your physical form without demanding that you justify your boundaries to anyone. The long shift of your emotional policing has entered a decree of absolute stillness, and your spirit is finally free to return home to its own dry, unwritten baseline. This high-altitude wisdom from the Mount Uji smoke chest can be brought directly down into the raw, cluttered landscape of your modern daily life. Think of how often you find yourself lying awake in the dark, staring at the faint blue glow of a phone screen while waiting for a single text message that never arrives. You are replaying a minor mistake you made during an afternoon meeting, comparing your slow professional timeline to the curated success of your former classmates and feeling deeply behind in the race of life. Your stomach handles this digital silence by clenching into a tight, anxious knot, instantly attempting to pack the cold uncertainty of that relationship into your own tissues. Like an old collection sack, you spend hours pretending to be completely okay during the daylight hours, plastering a false, polite smile over your face while your internal floorboards are thoroughly waterlogged with the unvoiced tension of your household. You desperately want to allow your mind to rest, yet the moment your head touches the pillow, a sharp spike of guilt flashes across your chest, telling you that you have not earned the right to drop the weight of the world because your family is still struggling. The profound freedom of this path does not require you to abandon your modern responsibilities or move to a remote cedar forest to escape the frantic vibrations of your digital circle. It reveals itself in the tiny, unhurried choices you make during the busy hours of your afternoon, in those brief moments when you choose to pause for a single breath before reacting to a sudden insult. When a family member dumps their unhealed anger onto your kitchen counter, you can catch your old, immediate impulse to act as an emotional sponge, choosing instead to let their bitter words pass through your awareness. Like a draft through an open mesh screen, you can care for their suffering with an immense, heartfelt devotion, without gripping their problems so tightly that your own fiber begins to rot in the dark. This is a practice of letting their emotional weather occupy its own space, recognizing that your nervous system was never designed to be a permanent filtration plant for their daily domestic friction. You can begin this quiet transformation tonight by making a gentle, conscious choice not to obey every frantic thought that surfaces in the dark theater of your mind. When an old memory of a ruined relationship tries to convince you that you are fundamentally flawed or not enough for this world, you can simply label that thought as a stray green leaf drifting across your bamboo tray. There is absolutely no need to gather that leaf and press it into your chest until your throat chokes with old shame. You can just leave it resting openly upon the wooden slats where the wind can move. You do not have to achieve a state of flawless, polished perfection to deserve a deep, restorative sanctuary away from the demands of your circle. The right to a quiet, unbothered sleep is an inherent property of your living frame, an unconditional shelter that does not require you to complete a single task on your relational clipboard to be valid. Consider how much vital energy you will reclaim when you stop treating your phone as a primitive mirror that must constantly validate your worth as a human being. The digital noise, the unread notifications, and the secret comparisons that drain your spirit are merely passing patches of low-valley mist, completely separate from the deep, aromatic presence that is listening to my voice right now. You can let the entire modern world spin on its complicated axis without your constant, hyper-vigilant supervision, trusting that the people you love will survive their own elemental weathering tonight without you needing to monitor their breathing. Let go of the illusion that your midnight overthinking has the power to fix a single broken structure in your past, allowing the remaining questions of your future to hang harmlessly in the darkness like unpicked leaves on a high ridge. As the quiet hours of the night deepen around your bed, you might allow the physical mass of your shoulders to drop a fraction of an inch further into the mattress, releasing the subtle, muscular bracing you have maintained since the morning. This is the sacred space where you are permitted to be completely invisible to the crowd, entirely hidden from the evaluations of those who expect you to be their emotional savior, the person who scrambled to hide their sensitivity, the person who wore a flawless mask of competence to appease a demanding boss, and the person who trapped the grief of the world to prove their love, are all being laid down like worn aprons on a low bench by the threshold. Tonight, you are simply a slow, steady pulse of breathing life, an uncompromised presence resting safely under a dry coverlet, completely untroubled by the definitions of failure and success. The mountain draft is moving cleanly through the open spaces of your room, and the heavy dampness you accumulated from the complaints of others is losing its sticky, toxic grip on your imagination. You are stepping completely off the wheel of resistance choosing to value the authentic clarity of this immediate minute over the impossible labor of keeping everyone around you perfectly comfortable. Let the distant sounds of the town and the modern timelines fade away into a soft, indistinct blur, like a landscape being slowly rinsed by a clean mountain rain after a long season of smoke. Your boundaries are perfectly secure, your frame is completely supported, and the darkness is a vast, welcoming home that knows exactly how to cradle your spirit without asking for a single explanation of how your day fell short of perfection. The high alpine night has finally deepened into a state of absolute, unblinking stillness. Across the terraces of Mount Uji, wrapping the entire cedar smoked in a single mantle of deep, protective dark, the intense, human storms of the lower valleys have fallen completely silent beyond the distant mountain ridges, and the shouting voices of the laborers have evaporated entirely into the high, cold atmosphere. You can feel the heavy mass of your physical body becoming remarkably soft, heavy, and still against the firm baseline of your bed, noticing how every single muscle is dropping its old somatic guard shift, the long, exhausting labor of acting as an accidental sponge. For the unexpressed grief of your world has reached an absolute unconditional conclusion for the night. You are being granted full, complete permission to stop solving the emotional riddles of your relationships, leaving the unfinished patterns of your family dynamics to rest exactly as they are, on the gravel path outside. Your breathing has naturally slowed into a very quiet, rhythmic draft, a gentle movement of air that rises and falls within your chest, without a single ripple of internal friction or mental effort. Each passive exhalation is a complete, unhurried, returning home to your own essential nature, a non-porous sanctuary where no external mood has the power to rewrite your core fibers. The vivid, clarifying insights of this evening are settling deeply into the very tissue of your heart, transforming from active, analytical thoughts into a silent, stable fragrance that thoroughly cleanses your inner house. You are no longer required to carry the waterlogged weight of a crowded boarding house, and you do not have to spend these midnight hours managing the silent, hidden expectations of those you love. The massive cedar beams of this evening are completely secure. The dark room asks nothing back from your intellect, and your spirit is entirely free to dissolve beneath the level of your busy daily identity. Let your consciousness sink completely into the dark, dry storage, loft of your imagination, visualizing yourself resting safely inside a heavy, solid cedar chest that has been lined with clean, fragrant paper. Moisture, the green moisture of your daily interactions, has fully left your fibers, carried away into the infinite dark sky by a mountain wind that required absolutely no assistance from your will to blow. You are a perfectly cured, stable, and aromatic harvest, completely enclosed and insulated within this deep wooden vault, where the dampness of the world can never reach your core again. The digital noise, the unread messages, and the sharp spikes of social comparison have lost their hard perimeters, turning into distant, indistinct blurs, like the sound of a small stream moving through a deep gorge 3 ridges away. You do not have to polish away a single rough edge of your sensitivity to deserve this total, unconditional insulation from the elements. Allow your awareness to drift even further down into the dreamless golden depths of this endless night, passing beneath the dry dirt floor of the smoked and into the silent bedrock of the mountain itself. The heavy blankets press down against your limbs like a warm draft, moving through the woven bamboo, reassuring your nervous system that you are completely safe, completely unwritten, and completely whole just as you are. The cypress charcoal brazier has grown completely dark. The last ribbon of pine smoke has cleared from the roof beams, and the entire landscape has aligned itself with a profound, cooling stillness. You have watched the internal furnace for far too long. You have checked the horizons 1,000 times in the rain, and the mountain has finally entered a decree of absolute unshakable peace. Slide away into the vast, protective custody of this dreamless sleep, where there is nothing left to construct, nothing left to justify, and nothing left to do but yield your entire frame to the dark. When the mountain finally clears the high terrace of every wet leaf and every heavy collection sack, what remains of the quiet witness who rests, beautifully uncompromised and entirely dry within the dark cedar of the silent world? The question itself dissolves like a final, thin wisp of resinous smoke that touches the cool air of the rafters for a single fraction of a second, before vanishing entirely into the immense, dark architecture of the night sky. It leaves behind no heavy residues on the smooth, hand-shaved wood of the storage loft, and it carves no permanent scar into the thick, unyielding floorboards that have accepted your total physical presence with such absolute, unconditional stability. You are no longer required to carry the exhausting weight of that old somatic record, and you do not have to keep a midnight tally of how many times your heart rate altered during the stressful interactions of the previous afternoon. The great Willowpeel scoop has been hung back on its wall peg. The massive woven bamboo trays have dropped their heavy weight toward the dry dirt floor, and the entire subterranean workspace of your mind has aligned itself with a profound cooling stillness that requires no further adjustments from your intellect. Your spirit is being invited to sink completely beneath the level of your active, analytical thinking, passing through the gritty layers of the workshop floor and into the deep, prehistoric silence of the earth that lives far below the reach of human panic. There is a beautiful, liberating rest that takes hold of your bones when you finally permit your physical form to be exactly as it is in this immediate, unpolished minute. For weeks and months, your sensitive mind has been acting like an anxious, tea-curing apprentice who stays awake through the bitter winter freeze, frantically trying to catch every stray drop of rain with his bare palms, because he believes a single humid evening will rot the entire harvest of the valley from within. You have strained every muscle in your neck and locked your jaw against the pillow, obsessively monitoring the internal furnace of your chest, terrified that if your attention wavers for a single heartbeat, your entire mental health will collapse into irreversible ruin. But the deep, elemental wisdom of this path reminds you that the massive cedar matrix does not depend on your hypervigilance to hold its shape in the dark. The river gravel remains perfectly firm. The heavy wood remains completely secure, and the natural physics of the cooling charcoal brazier will perform their silent work tonight without you needing to monitor a single somatic fluctuation. Let the mattress receive the absolute, unvarnished mass of your thighs, your hips, and your shoulders, noticing how the bed never hesitates to support your frame, regardless of how unevenly your pulse may be beating. You can let go of the secret, burning shame that you carried through the busy streets of the town, the painful belief that you are somehow more fragile, more broken, or more structurally flawed than the people who walk past you with confident strides. Their vessels are made of the very same temporary elements of earth, water, fire, and wind that move through your own chest, subject to the same natural laws of change, expansion, and sudden, transient weathering. Your sensitivity is not a fatal defect that makes you unfit for this life. It is simply the raw, unrefined resonance of a heavy, deep-walled bell that feels the wind more vividly than a block of cheap, inert stone. You do not have to silence the vibration to be safe, and you do not have to polish away the rough ridges of your current anxiety to be worthy of a deep, restorative shelter in the dark. Perhaps you can hear the faint, imaginary sound of a cold autumn rain falling on the heavy tiled roof far above the smoked floor, each drop sliding harmlessly down the dark clay grooves before sinking silently into the soft marshes outside the walls. The building does not struggle to keep the moisture from moving across its outer tiles, and it does not demand that the sky turn perfectly clear before it allows its massive timber supports to settle into their structural slots. It simply trusts its own heavy density to endure the weather while the night deepens. Let your remaining thoughts mimic that slow, unresisting compliance, becoming less sharp and more spaced out with every quiet breath that exits your lips. The difficult modern vocabulary that frightened you, the past moments of breathless panic in the crowded rooms, and the calendar dates that cause your chest to constrict are all losing their hard perimeters, turning into distant, indistinct shapes, like the sound of a small stream moving through a deep gorge 3 ridges away. You are entering the protective custody of the deep, subterranean dark, the sacred space where the mind stops striving for form and simply rests in its own immense, unproduced mass. In this territory of complete surrender, you are entirely hidden from the evaluations of the crowd, and you are completely safe from the frantic, demanding timelines of your old perfectionism. The person who scrambled to hide their physical vulnerability, the person who searched the dark for symptoms, and the person who wore a false mask of total competence to appease the expectations of others, are all being laid down like worn, heavy canvas aprons on a low bench by the smoke-shed threshold. Tonight, you are simply a slow, steady pulse of breathing life, a heavy physical presence resting under a thick blanket, completely separate from the concepts of sickness and health. Allow your consciousness to sink even further down, passing beneath the damp sand of the floor, beneath the deep roots of the coastal trees, and into the dark, silent core of the bedrock itself. The wind will continue to howl. Across the high bluffs, the freezing rain will continue to silver the stones of the courtyard, and the quiet gravity of the earth will keep holding your spirit until the morning light finds you completely grounded, unburdened, and renewed. You have watched the furnace for far too long. You have checked the internal channels 1,000 times in the storm, and the night has finally entered a decree of absolute, unshakable, quiet rest. Within the unyielding depth of this immediate, slow minute, where there is nothing left to construct, nothing left to justify, and nothing left to hold up through the force of your own will. The metal has met the earth, the sand has found its absolute center, and the darkness is a vast, welcoming home that knows exactly how to cradle your form, without asking for a single explanation of how your day fell short of perfection. Drop the iron wire, let the mountain carry the final remnants of your structural fatigue, and drift away into the dreamless golden sanctuary of this endless night. The endless night does not demand that you find a cure for your anxiety. Before you are permitted to let your skull sink deep into the grain of your pillow, it simply opens its great, silent reservoir to receive the full measure of your structural exhaustion, providing a deep, cool basin where the sharp, broken shapes of your day can lose their rigid perimeters as you drift past the boundary of ordinary, vigilant thinking. You might notice that the mind no longer feels like a narrow, drafty room filled with the echo of an unexpected ruin. Instead, it begins to feel like the entire mountain valley itself. After the workers have dropped their tools and gone to bed, when the small charcoal pit in the workshop has died down to a faint, silver dust, and the only remaining movement is the slow, heavy settling of the white fog between the cedar trunks. You are expanding into that quiet, dark territory, becoming the unmoving landscape that watches the weather pass, rather than the individual trying to hold the clouds in place with their bare hands. There is a profound, liberating truth in letting yourself be completely helpless against the pull of gravity. When we try to fix our fractured lives through the sheer force of our midnight overthinking, we are acting like an artisan who tries to stack an intricate, massive retaining wall while his fingers are shivering from a bitter mountain wind. The more he forces the stones to move, the more friction he creates against the clay, scraping his own skin and setting the foundation on an unstable tilt that will only lean further in the morning. The highest wisdom of this Zen path is to recognize when the time for masonry has ended and to have the immense courage to leave the collapsed slope exactly as it is. The wall does not need to be completed before you are allowed to rest, and the loose shale does not need to be cleared away to earn your right to a quiet chest. You can leave the unfinished structure in the protective custody of the dark, trusting that the stillness of these empty hours will do more to restore the integrity of your spirit than another night of frantic mending. As the heavy blankets press down against your limbs, let your awareness slide beneath the very sound of the wilderness, moving into the deep, unmeasured pauses that live between the heartbeats of the mountain. In those quiet intervals, there is no history, there is no bankruptcy of form, and there is no expectation for you to become anything other than what you are. In this immediate, slow breath, you can feel the cool air settling into the deepest corners of your lungs, a slow, gentle expansion that requires absolutely no justification or social title to exist. The air comes to you as a completely free gift from the room, an unconditional reassurance that your body is permitted to live, to feel, and to heal on its own organic timeline, entirely independent of what was dismantled or lost in the world outside your door. Let the physical weight of your skull sink deeply into the very center of your bed, letting go of the subtle, chronic bracing that lives just behind the ears and along the base of the neck. This is where we often store the heavy iron clamps of our control, the unconscious muscular tension we use to hold ourselves together when we feel structurally upended or cast aside by a changing world. You do not need to hold yourself together tonight. The floor beneath you is anchored into the massive stone foundations of the earth. The walls of this house are secure, and the entire night is an unmoving cradle that can carry your fatigue without a single tremor. You can let the muscles of your neck go completely loose, allowing your head to feel as heavy and inert as a smooth river stone that has been polished by 10,000 winters of clean, passing water. There are no more letters to read, no more defenses to construct, and no more trials to conduct in the silent theatre of your mind. The circumstances that upended you are simply parts of a changing world moving through the fog of their own nature, and their movements cannot diminish the clear, luminous quality of the awareness that is listening to this rhythm right now. You are stepping completely off the wheel of resistance, refusing to carry the secondary weight of judgment into the sanctuary of your sleep. Let the images of the high terrace, the old nun, and the bamboo screens fade away into a soft, indistinct blur, like a landscape being slowly covered by a heavy, silent snowfall at midnight. The snow falls on the jagged slate cliffs. It falls on the dark, quiet surface of the tea plants, and it falls on the timber roof of the hut, smoothing out all the sharp, irregular edges of the world until everything is wrapped in a single pale blanket of absolute peace. You are dissolving into that soft, white quiet, your breath becoming nothing more than a faint, rhythmic sigh that blends perfectly with the movement of the night air. The long lifting is finished. The stone has met the ground, and the foundation is completely clean, resting in the deep, undisturbed dark, where no story can ever reach it again. Slide down into the dreamless depths, where there is nothing left to remember, nothing left to balance, and nothing left to do, but yield to the immense, healing current of your own deep rest. Beneath that deep rest lies a landscape of undisturbed stillness that has never known the weight of a name, a debt, or a failure. When you drop the heavy identity of the one whose life structure was ruined, you are not fading into a void. You are returning to the vast, original space that existed before any wall was ever imagined. We often spend our entire lives believing we are the built house, permanently defined by the cracks and fractures that time has brought to our walls. But early, Zen wisdom reminds us that your true nature is more like the unyielding bedrock itself. The bedrock can hold the weight of a palace or the debris of a collapsed terrace for a season. Yet, when the structure is cleared away, it remains completely uncompromised, retaining its native strength without a single scar or a memory of what it carried. As you lie here in the profound dark of your room, let yourself experience the sheer luxury of being absolutely nothing to anyone for the next few hours. You do not have to be the architect who rebuilds the future. You do not have to be the reliable provider who keeps the roof from leaning, and you do not have to be the victim who demands an apology from the past. All those roles are merely heavy, iron tools that you can lay down on the damp soil of the workshop, allowing your spirit to become entirely weightless, floating on the cool, calm surface of this immediate midnight. The people who misjudged your path, the events that upended your security, and the choices that fractured your plans are all miles away, frozen in a past time that has no physical reality in this immediate room. They cannot touch the living, breathing sanctuary of your current body, unless you continue to rebuild their boundaries in your thoughts. When the mountain finally clears the path of every painted box and every broken sieve, who is the one that rests, deeply golden and entirely whole, within the dark limestone of the quiet world?